I never thought my own parents would destroy my future to protect a lie. But there, I sat in our mahogany-paneled dining room, staring at the official letter from Westfield High School, confirming my academic suspension. My college acceptance letters lay scattered across the table like fallen leaves, each one stamped with red ink that read, "Application withdrawn by student request." My mother Margaret dabbed her eyes with a tissue, while my father Robert adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, both looking at me with the kind of disappointment usually reserved for convicted felons. My 17-year-old brother Derek lounged in his chair with a satisfied smirk, watching my entire future crumble, because I refused to apologize for crimes I never committed. The ultimatum was simple: publicly confess to sabotaging Derek's academic achievements and beg his forgiveness, or lose everything I had worked 12 years to build. Looking back now, I should have seen Derek's manipulation coming from miles away. As the older brother by 2 years, I had always excelled academically without much effort. My grade point average had never dropped below 4.0. I ranked first in my graduating class of 312 students, and Stanford University had already accepted me with a full academic scholarship worth $240,000 over 4 years. National Merit Scholar Debate Team, Captain Volunteer Coordinator at the local food bank. My college applications read like a guidance counselor's dream. Derek struggled with everything I found easy. Despite expensive private tutoring sessions that cost my parents $800 per month, his grades hovered around a disappointing 2.7. While I spent evenings reading philosophy and writing research papers, Derek preferred gaming marathons and scrolling through social media. My parents, especially my mother Margaret, who had taught elementary school for 15 years before becoming a full-time homemaker, viewed Derek as the child who needed more support and encouragement. "Derek is more sensitive than Phil," she would explain to relatives during family gatherings. "He needs extra nurturing to build his confidence." My father Robert, who ran a successful insurance agency downtown, always defended Derek's academic struggles as evidence of a different kind of intelligence that traditional schools failed to recognize. They bought Derek every educational advantage money could provide: specialized learning software, one-on-one tutors, test preparation courses, even a private college counselor who charged $3,000 to help students craft compelling application essays. 3 weeks before my suspension, everything changed during what should have been a routine college planning meeting with our guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson. Derek had requested a family conference to discuss his application strategy for spring admission deadlines. I attended reluctantly, mainly because my parents insisted the whole family needed to support Derek's academic goals. Mrs. Patterson, a kind woman in her 50s, who had guided hundreds of students through the college process, seemed unusually uncomfortable as she spread Derek's file across her desk. Her normally cheerful demeanor appeared strained, and she kept glancing between Derek and my parents with obvious concern. "I need to address some irregularities I've discovered regarding both boys' college applications," she began carefully. "Several scholarship committees have contacted me with questions about conflicting information in submitted materials." Derek shifted nervously in his seat, while maintaining an expression of confused innocence. My parents leaned forward with protective concern, ready to advocate for their struggling younger son. Mrs. Patterson continued, "Phil's scholarship applications for the Gates Foundation and Coca-Cola programs were withdrawn last month, supposedly by Phil himself. The withdrawal letters bore his electronic signature, but the writing style differs significantly from his usual academic voice." I felt my stomach drop. Those scholarships represented an additional $50,000 in funding that would have eliminated any financial burden on my family. "I never withdrew those applications," I said immediately. "I spent weeks perfecting those essays." "Derek mentioned you were having some family issues that might require taking a gap year," Mrs. Patterson replied gently. "He said you asked him to help manage your correspondence because you were feeling overwhelmed." My parents turned to me with disappointed expressions. "Why didn't you tell us you were struggling?" my mother asked. "We could have helped you work through whatever problems you're having." Derek jumped in smoothly. his voice filled with manufactured concern. I tried to help Phil manage his stress, but he's been acting really strange lately. He keeps talking about how unfair it is that I'm getting extra support for college applications. I think he's worried that I might succeed and make him look bad. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. That's completely false, I protested. I've always supported Derek's education. Mrs. Patterson. Derek continued, his tone becoming more confident. I think Phil has been trying to sabotage my applications because he's jealous. He's used to being the only successful student in our family, and now that I'm improving with help from tutoring, he feels threatened. My father nodded thoughtfully, as if Derek's explanation made perfect sense. That would explain why Phil has been so critical of Derek's tutoring expenses lately. Mrs. Patterson looked increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. She opened another file and removed several printed emails. These are concerning. Multiple college admission offices have received anonymous tips questioning Derek's academic integrity. The messages claim that Derek's application essays contain plagiarized content and that his improved grades reflect assistance that violates honor code policies. Derek's face flushed red, but he quickly composed himself. Phil has access to my computer passwords. He's the only person who could have sent those messages. He's trying to destroy my chances because he can't stand the thought of sharing academic success with anyone else. My parents exchanged meaningful glances, and I realized with growing horror that they were accepting Derek's version of events without question. Everything I said in my defense only seemed to reinforce their belief that I was having some kind of jealous breakdown. I think Phil needs professional help, my mother whispered to Mrs. Patterson. This level of sibling rivalry isn't healthy. The meeting ended with my parents scheduling family therapy sessions, and Derek receiving sympathy for enduring his older brother's alleged psychological manipulation. I walked home in stunned silence, trying to process how my academic achievements had suddenly become evidence of mental instability. That evening, Derek cornered me in my bedroom while our parents discussed treatment options downstairs. His earlier facade of concern disappeared, completely replaced by a cold satisfaction that chilled me to the bone. You always got everything so easily, he said quietly, making sure our parents couldn't overhear. Perfect grades, teacher recommendations, scholarship offers, all handed to you, like you deserved them more than anyone else. Well, now it's my turn to be the successful son. Derek, what are you talking about? I asked, though a terrible suspicion was beginning to form in my mind. He smiled with genuine malice. I've been working on this for months, Phil. Every scholarship you lost, every opportunity that slipped away, I made that happen. And the best part, Mom and Dad will never believe you, because they need to protect their vulnerable baby boy who finally found his potential. You're lying, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew he was telling the truth. Try to prove it, Derek challenged. Go ahead and tell them what I just confessed. Watch how quickly they schedule more therapy sessions to address your paranoid delusions about your innocent little brother. He was right, and we both knew it. My parents had already convinced themselves that Derek was the victim in this situation, and anything I said would only confirm their belief that jealousy had driven me to irrational behavior. Derek left my room with a victorious expression, while I sat on my bed, trying to comprehend the magnitude of his betrayal. My own brother had systematically destroyed months of work, and my parents were helping him do it by refusing to consider that their golden boy might be capable of deception. Instead of confronting my parents with accusations, they would never believe I decided to investigate Derek's claims methodically. If he had really been sabotaging my applications for months, there would be evidence somewhere. I just needed to find it, without alerting him to my suspicions. My first breakthrough came through an unexpected conversation with Jenny Walsh, a classmate whose boyfriend, Brad Morrison, had experienced a similar academic disaster the previous semester. Jenny approached me after chemistry class, her usually bright demeanor replaced by troubled concern. Phil, I heard about your scholarship problems, she said quietly. I wanted to ask you something weird, but I didn't know if you'd think I was crazy." "Nothing seems crazy anymore," I replied honestly. "What's on your mind?" Jenny glanced around the hallway to make sure we weren't being overheard. "Brad lost his early admission to West Point last fall. The admissions board received anonymous reports claiming he had cheated on his qualifying exams. Brad swore he never cheated, but he couldn't prove the allegations were false." My pulse quickened. What does that have to do with my situation? The strange thing is that Derek was the person who comforted Brad after everything fell apart. He kept saying how unfair it was that someone would spread lies about such a good student. Derek even offered to help Brad appeal the decision by writing character reference letters. I felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to align. Did Brad ever find out who reported him? That's what's so weird, Jenny continued. The reports came from an anonymous email account, but they contained specific details about Brad's study habits and test preparation methods. Someone with inside knowledge of Brad's academic routine had to write them. How would Derek know those details? I asked, though I suspected the answer. Derek and Brad were study partners for 3 months before the accusation surfaced. Brad trusted Derek completely and shared all his preparation strategies, practice test scores, even his personal insecurities about meeting West Point standards. The pattern was becoming clear. Derek hadn't just targeted me. He had been systematically eliminating academic competition by exploiting the trust of students who considered him a friend. That afternoon, I arranged to meet Brad at a coffee shop across town, far from our school's social circles. Brad Morrison was a serious young man whose military family background had instilled rigid concepts of honor and integrity. His dream of attending West Point had been shattered by accusations that violated everything he believed about personal character. I know this might sound paranoid. I began carefully, but I think Derek might be involved in both our situations. Brad's expression hardened immediately. What kind of involvement? I explained Derek's confession and the suspicious timing of my scholarship withdrawals. Brad listened intently, his jaw tightening, as I described the pattern of academic sabotage. Derek knows things about my test preparation that I never told anyone else, Brad said slowly. He knew I had trouble with the math section and that I was retaking practice tests to improve my scores. That information appeared word for word in the anonymous reports. Did you ever give Derek access to your computer or email accounts? I asked. He borrowed my laptop a few times when his was being repaired, Brad admitted. I trusted him completely. He seemed like the most honest person in our class. We spent 2 hours comparing details of Derek's behavior leading up to our respective academic disasters. The similarities were too numerous to be coincidental. Derek had positioned himself as a supportive friend to both of us, gained access to confidential information about our academic strategies, then used that knowledge to craft convincing allegations that destroyed our opportunities. There's something else, Brad said as our meeting concluded. Derek's ex-girlfriend Sarah Chen contacted me last week. She said she had information about Derek that I needed to hear, but she seemed scared to talk openly. Sarah Chen was a brilliant student who had dated Derek briefly during junior year, before their relationship ended abruptly under mysterious circumstances. I had always wondered why someone with Sarah's intelligence and integrity would suddenly stop speaking to Derek entirely. I contacted Sarah through a secure messaging app that couldn't be traced back to school networks. Her response came within minutes. Meet me at Central Library tomorrow at 4 p.m. Come alone, and don't tell anyone we're talking. The next afternoon, I found Sarah in the library's most secluded study area, surrounded by thick volumes that provided visual barriers from other patrons. She looked exhausted and nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder as if expecting to be followed. I've been waiting for someone else to figure out what Derek really is, she said without preamble. I knew eventually his victims would start connecting the dots. Victims, I repeated, surprised by her choice of words. Sarah opened her backpack and removed a composition notebook filled with handwritten notes. Derek keeps detailed records of everyone he targets. I found this notebook when we were dating, but I didn't understand what it meant until he started using the information against me. She flipped through pages covered with names, personal details, academic strengths and weaknesses, family financial information, and social vulnerabilities. My name appeared on several pages, along with notes about my scholarship deadlines, application essays, and even private conversations I had shared with Derek about my college goals. Derek blackmailed me into doing his homework for 2 months, Sarah continued. He had taken compromising photos during our relationship and threatened to distribute them if I didn't help him maintain his improved grades. My hands trembled as I examined the notebook's contents. Derek had been conducting surveillance on dozens of students, gathering information that could be used for manipulation or sabotage. Brad's name appeared alongside detailed notes about his military aspirations and personal insecurities. "Why didn't you report this to school administration?" I asked. Sarah's laugh held no humor. "With what proof Derek is careful never to leave digital evidence. All his serious planning happens in handwritten notes that he keeps hidden. Besides, who would believe that the sweet, struggling student who everyone feels sorry for is actually a calculating sociopath?" She was right. Derek's carefully cultivated image as the sensitive underachiever made him seem incapable of sophisticated manipulation. Anyone who accused him would appear to be bullying a vulnerable student who was finally finding academic success. "How many other students has he targeted?" I asked, dreading the answer. "At least 12 that I've identified," Sarah replied. "Derek doesn't just sabotage people randomly. He targets students who pose specific threats to his academic or social standing. He's been systematically eliminating competition for college admissions, scholarship opportunities, and leadership positions." The scope of Derek's operation was staggering. For over a year, he had been destroying the futures of his own classmates while positioning himself as their supportive friend. My parents' golden boy was actually a predator who exploited trust to eliminate anyone who made him look inadequate by comparison. "There's more," Sarah said, lowering her voice even further. "Derek hasn't been working alone. He's been getting help from that expensive college consultant your parents hired." The revelation about Derek's partnership with his college consultant opened an entirely new dimension to his scheme. Linda Romano charged $3,000 for her exclusive college preparation services, marketing herself as a specialist who helped underperforming students unlock their hidden potential. My parents had hired her specifically to give Derek the professional guidance they believed he needed to compete with higher-achieving classmates. I arranged to investigate Romano's operation by posing as a potential client. Using a false name and borrowed identification, I scheduled a consultation at her upscale office in the business district downtown. Romano presented herself as a polished professional whose client testimonials promised miraculous academic transformations for struggling students. "Many of my clients come to me feeling defeated by the traditional educational system," Romano explained during our meeting. "Students like Derek Thompson have incredible untapped potential that just needs the right kind of specialized support to flourish." She was surprisingly forthcoming about her methods, apparently confident that her business practices were legitimate. "I provide students with customized essay templates, refined project concepts, and proven research strategies that help them compete with naturally gifted students who have always had advantages." "Where do these templates and concepts come from?" I asked carefully. Romano smiled with professional pride. "I maintain relationships with high-achieving students who share their successful academic work in exchange for financial compensation. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement that helps everyone succeed." The pieces clicked into place. Derek had been stealing academic work from students like me, then providing it to Romano, who polished and resold it to other clients. My original research project on sustainable energy solutions, which had taken months to complete and earned recognition at the state science fair, was being marketed as a template for $1,500 per purchase. "Derek Thompson has been particularly helpful in this regard," Romano continued. "He's provided some truly exceptional material that has helped dozens of students across 3 school districts achieve acceptance to competitive universities." I felt sick realizing that my brother had turned my academic achievements into a profitable business, while simultaneously destroying my own opportunities. Derek wasn't just sabotaging my applications. He was literally selling my work to other students, while ensuring I couldn't benefit from my own efforts. Over the following week, I discreetly contacted other students who had been affected by Derek's schemes. Brad Morrison helped me reach out to his military family connections, whose experience with investigation and evidence gathering proved invaluable. Sarah Chen provided access to Derek's notebook, which contained contact information for previous victims. Our informal alliance grew to include Amanda Foster, the student body president whose campaign speech Derek had stolen and sold to Romano's clients in neighboring districts. Amanda discovered that her original ideas for student government reform were being presented by candidates in 5 different schools, all of whom had purchased customized materials from Romano's consulting service. Tommy Rodriguez joined our group after learning that Derek had plagiarized his scholarship essay about overcoming economic hardship. Tommy's essay described his family's immigration experience and his determination to become the first person in his family to attend college. Derek had provided Tommy's deeply personal story to Romano, who edited it and sold it to wealthy students who wanted to appear disadvantaged in their college applications. Derek sat in my living room eating my grandmother's cooking, listening to me practice that essay out loud, Tommy said with barely controlled anger. He looked me in the eyes and told me how inspiring my story was. Then he went home and sold my family's struggles to rich kids who needed sympathy points for college admissions. Each victim's story revealed new layers of Derek's manipulation. He had systematically identified students' most valuable academic assets: original research, personal narratives, creative projects, leadership initiatives, then found ways to steal and monetize them while destroying the original creators' opportunities to benefit from their own work. Meanwhile, my parents continued to celebrate Derek's remarkable academic improvement. They hosted dinner parties where they proudly described his transformation from struggling student to early admission candidate at Duke University. Neighbors and family friends praised Derek's perseverance and my parents' dedication to supporting their son's educational journey. Derek's essay about overcoming learning challenges was absolutely beautiful. My mother told guests during one particularly painful evening. The admissions committee was moved to tears by his authentic description of finding his voice, despite academic difficulties. I watched Derek accept congratulations for achievements stolen from Tommy Rodriguez, whose actual learning difficulties had never prevented him from working 3 part-time jobs to support his family while maintaining a 3.8 grade point average. Derek's learning challenges consisted mainly of preferring video games to homework, while Tommy genuinely struggled with dyslexia that he had overcome through determination and extra study hours. The most devastating discovery came when I learned that Derek's early admission to Duke University had been secured using an essay he had plagiarized from my friend Lisa Chen Sarah's older sister. Lisa had been rejected from Duke's same program, despite superior grades and test scores, never knowing that her own essay was being used against her by another applicant. Lisa spent months perfecting that essay. Sarah explained with tears in her eyes. She wrote about our family's experience immigrating from Taiwan and how education represented hope for building a better life in America. Derek turned our personal history into his fake sob story about overcoming adversity. The pattern was consistent. Derek identified students' most meaningful academic achievements, stole their work through various forms of manipulation or access, then used their efforts to advance his own prospects while ensuring the original creators faced obstacles or failures. Our alliance realized we were dealing with something far more serious than typical academic dishonesty. Derek had created a systematic operation that was destroying multiple futures while generating significant profits for himself and Romano. The emotional damage to his victims extended far beyond academic setbacks. He had violated their trust, stolen their personal stories, and turned their most meaningful accomplishments into commodities. "We need to expose everything simultaneously," Amanda declared during one of our secret meetings. "If we approach this piecemeal, Derek will find ways to cover his tracks and discredit us individually. Brad nodded with military precision. We need overwhelming evidence that can't be dismissed or explained away. Derek's entire operation needs to be revealed at once, before he has time to manipulate the narrative. The decision was unanimous. We would document every aspect of Derek's scheme, gather irrefutable proof of his collaboration with Romano, and coordinate a comprehensive exposure that would reveal the full scope of his academic fraud network. But Derek was more intelligent than we had initially realized, and he was already planning his most devastating counterattack. Derek discovered our investigation through methods that demonstrated just how sophisticated his surveillance capabilities had become. While I thought I was being careful to keep our alliance secret, Derek had been monitoring my communications and tracking my movements for weeks before making his move. The first sign of trouble came when my computer suddenly crashed during a video call with Brad and Amanda. When the system rebooted, several files containing our evidence documentation had been corrupted or deleted entirely. I initially assumed it was a coincidence, but similar technical problems began affecting other members of our group. Sarah's phone started receiving strange calls where the caller would hang up immediately upon her answering. Tommy discovered that his part-time work schedule had been mysteriously altered, forcing him to miss our planned meetings. Amanda's student government email account was hacked, and several important messages about our investigation disappeared from her inbox. Derek was systematically disrupting our coordination efforts while gathering intelligence about our evidence collection. His counterstrike, when it finally came, was more devastating than any of us had anticipated. The attack began on a Tuesday morning when I arrived at school to find Principal Harrison waiting by my locker with 2 security officers and a grim expression that made my stomach sink immediately. "Phil, we need to speak privately in my office," Dr. Harrison said in a tone that suggested this was not a request. As we walked through the hallways, I noticed other students staring and whispering. Word had already spread that something significant was happening, though nobody seemed to know exactly what. My mind raced through possible explanations, but I couldn't imagine what Derek might have done to create such a dramatic scene. Dr. Harrison's office felt smaller than usual with both security officers present. The principal arranged several folders on his desk, with the careful precision of someone preparing to deliver life-changing news. "Phil, I'm going to be direct with you, because the evidence we've uncovered is extremely serious," Dr. Harrison began. "We've received reports that you've been operating an academic fraud network that has affected multiple students and school districts." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "That's absolutely false," I said immediately. "I've never cheated or helped anyone else cheat." Dr. Harrison opened the first folder and removed a stack of printed documents. "These are copies of files recovered from your personal computer and cloud storage accounts. They contain stolen student work, forged academic documents, and correspondence with a college consulting service about selling plagiarized materials." I stared at the papers in disbelief. The documents appeared to be legitimate evidence of exactly the kind of fraud network that Derek and Romano had been operating, except every piece of evidence pointed to me as the mastermind. "I've never seen these files before," I protested, but even as I spoke, I recognized some of the stolen work from our investigation into Derek's activities. "Phil, we also found email accounts in your name that were used to send anonymous tips to college admission offices," Dr. Harrison continued. "These messages contained false information designed to harm other students' applications." The security officers watched me carefully as Dr. Harrison presented each piece of manufactured evidence. Everything appeared authentic, from email headers to document timestamps, but I knew it was all fabricated. "Where did you get this information?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Your brother Derek came forward yesterday after struggling with his conscience for several weeks," Dr. Harrison explained. "He provided us with detailed documentation of how you forced him to participate in your scheme through threats and psychological manipulation." The betrayal was so complete that I felt dizzy trying to process it. Derek had not only framed me for his own crimes, but had positioned himself as the reluctant whistleblower who was bravely exposing his older brother's corruption. Dr. Harrison opened another folder, containing what appeared to be a signed confession in Derek's handwriting. Derek described how you threatened to ruin his college prospects unless he helped you steal work from other students. He says you told him that academic success was a zero-sum competition, where only the most ruthless students survive. Derek is lying, I said desperately. He's the one who's been stealing student work and selling it through Linda Romano's consulting service. Phil Derek provided us with recorded conversations where you explain your fraud operation in detail. Dr. Harrison replied sadly. We have your voice describing exactly how you manipulate other students and cover your tracks. The recording quality was poor, but the voice was unmistakably mine discussing academic fraud techniques with clinical precision. I realized that Derek must have been secretly recording our conversations for months, then editing the audio to remove context and create false narratives. These recordings are edited, I insisted. Derek has been manipulating audio to make it sound like I'm confessing to his crimes. Dr. Harrison shook his head with obvious disappointment. Phil, I've known you since you were a freshman. Your academic record has been exemplary, which makes this situation even more tragic. I believe you started with good intentions, but gradually became obsessed with maintaining your competitive advantage at any cost. The meeting concluded with my immediate suspension, pending a full investigation. College admission offices were being notified about my alleged academic fraud, and criminal charges were being considered depending on the scope of financial damages to other families. I walked home in a state of shock, trying to comprehend how Derek had so thoroughly reversed our positions. Every piece of evidence we had gathered against him was now being used to incriminate me, while he appeared as the innocent victim who had courageously exposed his brother's corruption. My parents were waiting in the living room when I arrived, their faces reflecting a mixture of disappointment and confusion that broke my heart. Derek sat between them with red eyes and a tissue box playing the role of the traumatized younger brother who had been forced to betray family loyalty for the sake of justice. Phil Derek has told us everything, my father said quietly. We need to understand why you thought it was necessary to involve your brother in such destructive behavior. My mother looked at me with tears in her eyes. How could you put Derek in such a terrible position? He's been carrying this burden for months, trying to protect you while knowing that other students were being hurt. Derek's performance was masterful. He portrayed himself as torn between love for his brother and moral obligation to protect innocent classmates. Every question my parents asked gave him opportunities to reinforce his narrative while making me appear increasingly guilty and manipulative. I kept hoping Phil would stop on his own, Derek said with perfectly calibrated emotion. I thought if I helped him with just a few things, he'd realize that cheating wasn't worth it. But he kept demanding more, and he threatened to destroy my college applications if I didn't cooperate. The family meeting stretched for hours, as Derek provided detailed explanations for every aspect of his fraud operation, while casting himself as my unwilling accomplice. My denials only seemed to confirm their belief that I was continuing to manipulate the situation even after being exposed. Derek has agreed to cooperate fully with the school's investigation, my father announced. He's also prepared to make public statements acknowledging his participation and apologizing to affected students. Phil, you need to take responsibility for what you've done, my mother added. Derek is showing incredible courage by coming forward, and you need to follow his example. The trap was perfect. Derek had positioned himself as the hero of the story, while making me the villain whose denials appeared to be desperate lies. Any evidence I tried to present against him would be dismissed as attempts to blame my innocent brother for my own crimes. That night, Derek knocked on my bedroom door with a satisfied expression that he didn't bother to hide since our parents were out of earshot. You really thought you could outmaneuver me, he said with genuine amusement. I've been planning this reversal since the day I started documenting your investigation. Every move you made just gave me more material to use against you. How did you create all that fake evidence? I asked, genuinely curious about the technical aspects of his frame job. Derek shrugged casually. Simple computer skills and basic social engineering. I had access to your passwords, your cloud accounts, your email history. Creating fake files and backdating them was elementary. The hardest part was editing audio recordings to make your voice say what I needed, but there are apps for that now. What about the other victims, Brad, Sarah, Amanda, Tommy? They all know the truth about what you've been doing. Do they? Derek asked with a knowing smile. Or do they know that Phil Thompson has been caught red-handed, operating an academic fraud network, and anyone who defends him is probably involved in the conspiracy? I realized with growing horror that Derek had effectively neutralized our entire alliance by making us all appear complicit in the very crimes we had been trying to expose. Any student who spoke up for me would be viewed as a co-conspirator trying to avoid consequences. Besides, Derek continued, most of them have their own secrets they'd rather keep private. Sarah's compromising photos, Tommy's immigration status concerns Amanda's scholarship fraud from last year that she thought nobody knew about. Amazing how cooperative people become when they have something to lose. Derek had been gathering blackmail material on everyone in our alliance, while we focused on documenting his academic fraud. He was always several steps ahead, preparing contingencies for every possible threat to his operation. You're going to confess, publicly apologize to everyone you've hurt, and accept whatever consequences come your way, Derek concluded. And I'm going to be the brave little brother who helped bring justice to all the students you victimized. As Derek left my room, I realized that fighting back would require more than just gathering evidence or forming alliances. I needed to think strategically the way Derek had been thinking all along. If I was going to expose his operation, I had to become as calculating and patient as he was. The war was far from over, but I was finally ready to fight it on Derek's own terms. Instead of continuing to protest my innocence or trying to convince my parents of Derek's deception, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen where my family was eating breakfast and announced my surrender. I've been thinking about everything that happened yesterday, I said calmly, pouring myself a glass of orange juice. Derek is right. I need to take responsibility for what I've done. My parents exchanged glances of relief, while Derek's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He studied my face carefully, clearly suspicious of my sudden change in attitude. Phil, that's very mature of you, my mother said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I know this must be difficult, but acknowledging your mistakes is the first step toward making things right. I'd like to have a family meeting tonight to discuss how I can make amends. I continued. Derek deserves a public apology, and all the students I hurt deserve to hear me confess to what I did to them. Derek's eyes narrowed slightly, but he maintained his supportive expression. Phil, I'm proud of you for making this decision. I know how hard it must be to admit that you've been wrong. My father nodded approvingly. We'll schedule the meeting for tonight after dinner. Derek, would you be comfortable having Phil apologize directly to you in front of the family? Of course, Derek replied, though I detected uncertainty in his voice. I think it would help both of us move forward. Throughout the day at school, I maintained my facade of defeat and remorse. Students who had heard about my suspension whispered as I passed in the hallways, but I kept my head down and avoided making eye contact. Several teachers approached me with concerned expressions, offering support during what they assumed was a difficult time of accountability and growth. Dr. Harrison called me to his office during lunch period to discuss my confession timeline and the legal implications of cooperating with the investigation. Phil, I want you to know that your willingness to accept responsibility is being noted by everyone involved in this situation, he said kindly. While there will certainly be consequences for your actions, your cooperation will be taken into consideration. I understand, Dr. Harrison, I replied with appropriately subdued demeanor. I just want to make sure I handle this properly, so that other students can begin healing from what I put them through. That afternoon, I spent several hours in my bedroom preparing for the family meeting. Derek knocked on my door around 5 o'clock, clearly unable to contain his curiosity about my sudden transformation. "Phil, I have to ask, what changed your mind so dramatically?" he said, sitting on the edge of my bed uninvited. "Yesterday, you were insisting that I was the one committing fraud. And today, you're ready to confess everything." I looked up from my laptop with a tired expression. I realized that fighting this was only making things worse for everyone. "You were brave enough to tell the truth, even though it meant exposing your own brother. The least I can do is be equally honest about my actions." Derek seemed satisfied with my explanation, but he continued probing. "What exactly are you planning to say during the meeting tonight?" "Just the truth," I replied simply. "I'm going to explain how I manipulated you into helping me, how I threatened other students, how I stole their work and sold it through Romano's service. Everything you already told them, but from my own perspective. And you're prepared to face the consequences: criminal charges, college rejections, public humiliation." I met his gaze directly. "Derek, I learned something important from watching how you handled this situation. Sometimes the most strategic choice is the one that appears to be surrender." Derek's expression shifted slightly, and I could see him trying to interpret the meaning behind my words. But before he could ask follow-up questions, my mother called us downstairs for dinner and the family meeting that would determine both our futures. During dinner, my parents praised Derek for his courage and maturity in handling such a difficult situation. They discussed plans for Derek to provide victim impact statements to help other students process their experiences with my alleged fraud network. "Derek, your willingness to prioritize justice over family loyalty shows real character," my father said proudly. "You've grown into a young man with strong moral principles." Derek accepted their praise graciously, while glancing at me occasionally with continued suspicion. He clearly sensed that something about my surrender didn't align with the brother he knew, but he couldn't identify what was wrong. After dinner, we gathered in the living room for what my parents expected to be my formal confession and apology. Derek positioned himself across from me, ready to receive the public vindication he had been orchestrating for months. "Phil, we're ready to listen whenever you're ready to speak," my mother said gently. I opened my laptop and pulled up a document I had been preparing all afternoon. "I want to read my statement carefully, so I don't leave out any important details," I began. Derek leaned forward expectantly, anticipating the moment when I would publicly acknowledge his version of events and cement his position as the wronged party who had courageously sought justice. "First, I want to apologize to Derek for putting him in an impossible situation." I continued, looking directly at my brother. He trusted me as his older brother, and I exploited that trust for my own selfish purposes. My parents nodded approvingly, while Derek's smug expression grew more pronounced. "Derek, I know you struggled with the decision to expose my activities, and I want you to know that I don't blame you for choosing to protect other students instead of protecting me." "Thank you, Phil," Derek replied with perfectly calibrated humility. "That means a lot to hear." I took a deep breath and prepared to deliver the most important performance of my life. Everything I had learned from watching Derek's manipulation techniques over the past few months would be crucial for what came next. "Derek, there's something I need to ask you before I continue with my confession," I said carefully. "When you were helping me with the academic fraud, did you ever feel like what we were doing was wrong?" Derek's confidence flickered for just a moment before he recovered. "Of course I felt wrong about it, Phil. That's why I eventually had to report what was happening." "Right. But I mean, during the actual activities. When you were accessing other students' computers, when you were stealing their essays, when you were selling their work to Romano's clients. Did you ever express concerns to me about the morality of what we were doing?" My parents listened carefully, expecting Derek to describe his moral struggles and my dismissive responses to his concerns. "I tried to talk you out of it many times, Derek said slowly, clearly, uncertain about where my questions were leading. Specifically, do you remember the conversation we had about Tommy Rodriguez's scholarship essay? I pressed. The one where we discussed how to edit his immigration story to make it more marketable to Romano's wealthy clients. Derek's face went pale as he realized I was leading him into admitting specific details about activities that only the actual perpetrator would know. Phil, I don't think we need to revisit every detail, Derek said quickly, but my parents were now paying close attention to his responses. Oh, but I think the details matter, Derek. I continued with growing confidence. Especially the conversation where you explained to me how you had gained access to Amanda Foster's student government files by pretending to help her with campaign materials. Derek stood up abruptly, his composure finally cracking. Phil, you're trying to confuse everyone with false memories. You know exactly what happened, and you're trying to manipulate the situation again. But my parents were beginning to notice the specificity of my questions and Derek's increasingly defensive responses. My father leaned forward with a puzzled expression. Derek, how would Phil know those specific details if he was making them up? I smiled for the first time in days, realizing that Derek's perfect trap had become the foundation for my perfect countertrap. Instead of answering my father's question, I calmly opened my laptop and clicked on a file I had prepared specifically for this moment. The screen filled with a detailed website that looked like a public confession blog, complete with documented evidence, recorded conversations, and testimonials from multiple victims. I think it would be easier if I just show you what I've been working on today, I said, turning the laptop toward my parents. The website's header read, The Truth About Academic Fraud at Westfield High School, in bold letters, followed by a comprehensive timeline of Derek's operation dating back 18 months. Every piece of evidence that our alliance had gathered was presented in chronological order, with supporting documentation and cross-references that made the scope of Derek's activities impossible to deny. My parents began reading with confused expressions that gradually transformed into shock and horror as they absorbed the magnitude of what was being revealed. Derek lunged toward the laptop, trying to close it, but I gently moved it out of his reach. Don't worry, Derek, I said calmly. This isn't posted online yet. I wanted to share it with the family first, just like you shared your version of events with Dr. Harrison. The website contained everything: screenshots of Derek's notebook, documenting his targets, financial records, showing payments from Romano's consulting service, audio recordings of Derek confessing to his schemes, and testimonials from 12 different victims, describing how Derek had gained their trust before stealing their academic work. This is all fabricated, Derek said desperately, but his voice lacked conviction. Phil created fake evidence to frame me because he got caught. My mother looked up from the laptop with tears in her eyes. Derek, this recording sounds exactly like your voice. How could Phil have faked such detailed conversations? The audio files included Derek's confession from my bedroom the previous night, when he had gloated about his successful frame job and explained his technical methods for creating false evidence. His own words provided the most damning testimony possible. Phil must have edited these recordings the same way he edited the evidence against himself. Derek insisted, but he was clearly panicking as his carefully constructed narrative collapsed. My father scrolled through financial documents showing Derek's payments from Romano's service, cross-referenced with timestamps that corresponded to specific thefts of student work. The money trail was comprehensive and undeniable. Derek, how do you explain these bank deposits that match exactly with the dates when student work was stolen? My father asked quietly. I don't know how Phil created those fake financial records, Derek replied, but his explanations were becoming increasingly desperate and illogical. I opened another section of the website that contained testimony from every member of our alliance, each describing their specific experiences with Derek's manipulation and providing evidence that corroborated the timeline of his activities. Sarah Chen describes how you blackmailed her using compromising photos. I read aloud. Tommy Rodriguez explains how you stole his scholarship essay, about his family's immigration experience. Amanda Foster documents how you plagiarized her student government platform and sold it to candidates in other districts. My parents continued reading, as I narrated the contents, their expressions reflecting growing horror at the systematic nature of Derek's operation. The website included copies of Derek's handwritten notebook, which contained detailed profiles of potential victims, along with strategies for gaining access to their academic work. Brad Morrison's testimony includes military family verification of the timeline surrounding his West Point rejection. I continued. The anonymous reports that destroyed his application contained information that only Derek could have accessed. Derek made one final attempt to salvage his position. Even if some of this is true, Phil forced me to participate by threatening to ruin my college prospects. I was a victim of his manipulation too. But the evidence contradicted his claims completely. The website included recordings of Derek planning his schemes independently, financial records showing he had been profiting from stolen work for over a year, and testimony from victims describing Derek's autonomous decision-making throughout their interactions. Derek, the evidence shows you were operating this scheme months before Phil even knew about it, my mother said softly. You can't have been forced into activities that you initiated yourself. The most devastating section of the website contained Derek's own recorded explanation of how he had framed me using fabricated evidence and edited audio recordings. His voice clearly described the technical methods he had used to create false files and backdate them on my computer. This recording is from last night, I explained to my parents. Derek came to my room to gloat about how successfully he had reversed our positions. He explained exactly how he created fake evidence to make me appear guilty of his crimes. My father listened to Derek's voice describing his manipulation techniques with clinical precision. The recording captured Derek's pride in his strategic thinking and his confidence that his frame job was undetectable. I've been documenting Derek's activities for weeks. I continued, but I needed him to confess to the framing operation in his own words before I could prove my innocence. Derek slumped into his chair, finally realizing that his position was hopeless. The website contained too much corroborating evidence to be dismissed as fabrication, and his own recorded confession provided the most convincing testimony possible. The website will go live automatically at midnight tonight, unless I input a cancellation code, I announced. Every college admission office, school board member, and local news outlet will receive links to the full documentation by morning. My parents stared at Derek with expressions of devastation and betrayal. Their golden boy, the sensitive child who had finally found his academic potential, was revealed to be a calculating predator who had systematically destroyed the futures of his own classmates. Derek, how could you do this to other students? My mother whispered. How could you steal their personal stories and sell them? And how could you try to destroy your own brother's future to cover up your crimes? My father added with quiet anger. Derek had no response that could address the magnitude of his actions. The evidence was overwhelming, the financial records were undeniable, and his own voice had provided the most incriminating testimony possible. Phil, can you cancel the automatic posting? My father asked desperately. We need time to process this and decide how to handle the situation properly. I looked at Derek, who was staring at the floor in defeat. That depends on whether Derek is willing to make things right with his victims and accept responsibility for what he's actually done. The family meeting that was supposed to feature my public confession had become Derek's comprehensive exposure. His perfect trap had been turned against him using his own methods and evidence. Derek, I said quietly, you taught me something important about strategic thinking. Sometimes the best defense is appearing to surrender while you prepare your real counterattack. The Golden Boy's reign of manipulation was finally over, and the real work of justice and accountability was about to begin. The weeks following Derek's exposure brought consequences that extended far beyond our family. Within 24 hours of the website going live, local news outlets picked up the story, and the academic fraud network became a regional scandal that prompted investigations across 3 school districts. Derek faced immediate expulsion from Westfield High School criminal charges for academic fraud and identity theft, and civil lawsuits from families whose children's futures had been damaged by his schemes. His early admission to Duke University was rescinded when the plagiarized essay was discovered, and no legitimate college would consider his application after the scandal broke. Linda Romano's consulting business collapsed overnight as universities launched investigations into her client materials and discovered the systematic resale of stolen student work. She faced criminal charges for operating an academic fraud enterprise and civil liability for the damages caused to students whose work had been stolen and resold. My own vindication came swiftly once the evidence was reviewed by school officials and law enforcement. Stanford University not only reinstated my acceptance, but offered an additional merit scholarship for what they termed exceptional character under adversity. Multiple universities reached out with full scholarship offers after learning about my role in exposing the academic fraud network. The investigation revealed that Derek's operation had affected 43 students across 3 school districts, with financial damages exceeding $200,000 in stolen scholarship opportunities and fraudulent consulting fees. Several students who had lost college admissions due to Derek's sabotage were able to appeal their rejections successfully once the fraud was documented. Brad Morrison's West Point application was reviewed and approved after the military academy learned about the false accusations that had derailed his original candidacy. Amanda Foster received recognition from the State Student Government Association for her original platform ideas that Derek had stolen and sold. Tommy Rodriguez was awarded a full scholarship to his dream university after his authentic immigration story gained national attention through the fraud investigation. Sarah Chen, whose courage in preserving Derek's notebook had made the exposure possible, received a settlement from Romano's insurance company and multiple scholarship offers from universities, impressed by her integrity in coming forward despite personal risks. The most difficult part of the aftermath involved rebuilding my relationship with my parents, who struggled to comprehend how completely Derek had manipulated their perceptions and emotions. Family therapy sessions helped them understand the psychological techniques Derek had used to exploit their protective instincts and turn them against their other son. "We failed you in the most fundamental way parents can fail," my mother said during one particularly emotional therapy session. "We chose to protect the child who was hurting others instead of supporting the child who was being victimized." My father's guilt was even more profound. I pride myself on being analytical and objective, but Derek played me like a violin. He understood exactly which emotional buttons to push to make me see you as the problem instead of him. The healing process required months of honest communication and gradual rebuilding of trust. My parents had to confront their own biases about academic success, family dynamics, and the assumptions they had made about both their children's characters. Derek's rehabilitation proved to be the most complex aspect of the entire situation. Facing real consequences for the first time in his life, he initially responded with anger and denial, before gradually accepting the reality of his actions and their impact on others. Court-mandated counseling revealed that Derek's manipulative behavior stemmed from deep insecurities about his academic abilities and fear that he could never measure up to his older brother's natural achievements. His fraud operation had been motivated not just by laziness or greed, but by desperate attempts to prove his worth through any means necessary. I convinced myself that everyone else had unfair advantages, Derek explained during a family therapy session 6 months after his exposure. Phil made everything look effortless, so I told myself that cheating was just leveling the playing field. But really, I was terrified of accepting that I might not be as intelligent as I wanted to believe. Derek's path to redemption included making financial restitution to affected families, performing community service focused on academic integrity education, and participating in counseling programs designed to address manipulative behavior patterns. He enrolled in a community college program where he could rebuild his academic credentials through legitimate effort. The process wasn't easy, and Derek's progress included setbacks and moments of regression to old patterns. But gradually, he began developing genuine empathy for his victims and authentic accountability for his choices. "I stole more than just academic work," Derek admitted during our first private conversation after the scandal. "I stole people's trust, their stories, their futures." Tommy's essay about his family's immigration wasn't just homework to him. It was his identity, his history, his hope. I turned something sacred into a commodity. Our relationship required careful rebuilding based on honesty, rather than the manipulation that had characterized Derek's interactions with everyone around him. He had to learn how to communicate without trying to control outcomes, while I had to learn how to trust again without becoming paranoid about hidden agendas. The community impact of the scandal led to significant policy changes in academic integrity oversight. Schools implemented new monitoring systems for college applications. Consulting services faced increased regulation and background check requirements, and student work protection protocols were strengthened across the district. My story became part of presentations about academic fraud prevention that I delivered at schools throughout the region. Students learned about the warning signs of manipulation, the importance of protecting their original work, and the value of reporting suspicious academic activities rather than becoming unwilling accomplices. The most important lesson I learned, I would tell audiences, is that real strength isn't about winning at any cost. It's about having the patience to document the truth and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when everyone around you believes a lie. 1 year after Derek's exposure, our family gathered for my graduation from Westfield High School as valedictorian. My parents watched with pride as I delivered a commencement speech about overcoming adversity through integrity rather than manipulation. Derek attended the ceremony as well, having earned his GED through community college courses and begun working toward legitimate academic goals. Phil taught me that success earned through hurting others isn't really success at all, Derek said in his own brief remarks to our family after the ceremony. He showed me that real achievement comes from creating value instead of stealing it from others. The Stanford campus where I enrolled that fall felt like a new beginning, not just for my education, but for my understanding of Justice Family and the importance of strategic thinking applied to positive purposes rather than destructive ones. My experience with Derek's manipulation had taught me valuable lessons about human psychology evidence gathering and the patience required to fight back against injustice effectively. As I reflect on everything that happened, I realize that Derek's attempt to destroy my future actually prepared me for challenges I never could have anticipated. Learning to think strategically under pressure, document evidence systematically, and maintain composure while being falsely accused. These skills proved invaluable throughout my college years and beyond. The most profound transformation was Derek's evolution from someone who viewed relationships as tools for manipulation into someone who understood the value of genuine connection based on mutual respect. His rehabilitation wasn't easy or quick, but it was real, and it gave our family hope that people can change when they face appropriate consequences and receive proper support. The academic fraud scandal ultimately strengthened our community's commitment to integrity and created systems that better protect students from exploitation. Derek's victims were able to pursue their educational dreams without the obstacles he had created, and many of them went on to achieve remarkable success in their chosen fields. Today, when people ask me how I survived having my own brother systematically sabotage my future, I tell them that the experience taught me the most important lesson of my life. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about truth. And truth, when documented carefully and revealed strategically, has a power that no amount of manipulation can overcome. Sometimes the best way to fight back isn't to strike immediately, but to be patient enough to let your opponents defeat themselves with their own actions. Derek's downfall came not from my attacks against him, but from his own recorded confessions and documented crimes. The truth was always there. I just had to create the right circumstances for it to be heard. Have you ever faced a situation where someone you trusted completely betrayed that trust for their own gain? How did you find the strength to fight back when everyone around you believed lies instead of the truth? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for following this journey with me. If this story resonated with you, or if you think it might help someone else who's facing similar challenges, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories about overcoming adversity, and share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the power of strategic patience in the pursuit of justice. Remember, no matter how hopeless a situation might seem, there's always a way to fight back and reclaim your future. Sometimes you just have to be smart enough to let the truth speak for itself.